Hey everyone, welcome back to session 2 of the Debate Hub. Today, we're going to be analyzing how to produce evidence in public forum debate. So Sam, I want to get you started off. What is evidence?
Well, you can think of evidence as snippets or quotations out of an article that you use to support your argument. It shouldn't make up your argument per se, but rather it should support it and supplement it. So, why is evidence important, Frank?
That's a great question, Sam. We sort of alluded to this answer in session 1, but the reason why evidence is so important is because public forum debate is an evidentiary format of debate. That is to say, we're given a topic a month or two in advance, and these topics are often incredibly complex, ranging from economic to social to even political issues. So, in order for us to learn about these complex topics, as well as to substantiate our points, we must refer back to expert opinions as well as statistics from research. So, knowing this, what constitutes good evidence and how is it distinct from bad evidence?
Well, that's a good question, and one that's relatively hard to answer because good evidence comes in many different sizes, shapes, and forms. But at the end of the day, good evidence is evidence that helps you win. The first premise for which evidence is good is one that is qualified. Here, you can refer to a lot of the different research tactics that you might have learned from school, which is rather than looking at a Wikipedia article, for example, you could go on Google Scholar to find an author who's more qualified and more well spoken on your subject. Not only will this help you because the judge and opponents can better trust what your evidence is saying, but also, the more you read of qualified evidence, the more in depth your understanding will be on certain issues because you're directly reading from experts who have worked in the field for perhaps decades and decades on end. Second, evidence should be concise. Since debate is a timed game at the end of the day, you want to fit in as many pieces of evidence that you see fit. And the best way to do that is to make sure that you're not wasting any words in your evidence and having it in its more concise, bare bones form so long as it conveys the message coherently. Third, good evidence should be conclusive. Rather than dilly-dallying around your answer, the good evidence should directly say what you want it to say so that it can substantiate your argument in a way that's powerful. Fourth, good evidence should be detailed. Detailed evidence will have a lot of good logic, reasoning, and statistics. So even in the case that your opponent has a counter argument or a counter piece of evidence, you can leverage your quality piece of evidence to explain why it's better in this case, and perhaps the other piece of evidence they're presenting doesn't cover the nuances that yours does. Finally, good evidence is rhetorically persuasive and powerful. This is always something that's additive and not true in all cases, but a piece of evidence that substantiates your claim in a way that's perhaps more emphatic than your argument actually is always beneficial because that's persuasive to the judge.
So, now let's talk about how to produce and present evidence in public forum. So, you've probably realized by now, public forum has its own set of lingo, and this is no different for evidence. Evidence in debate is called a card, and to produce evidence is called cutting a card. So there's actually a funny backstory to this. The reason why the terminology cards as well as cutting came into place is because before computers were readily accessible to be used in a debate, the way that debaters produce their evidence is by physically printing out long articles onto pieces of paper, highlighting those pieces of paper for what they were going to say in the article, and then physically using scissors to cut those articles into cards so that they could be presented in round. So that's the reason why the words card and cutting came into place. Given that public forum is a relatively new format, there's still disagreements about how evidence should be presented in this format. So there's two schools of thought. The first school of thought is paraphrasing. That is to say, when you see an article and you see a point you want to incorporate into your case or your rebuttals, you would rewrite that point in your own words. The second school of thought that's now a bit more prominent on the national circuit is called a cut card, which is what we're demonstrating to you. Out of these two schools of thought, we're teaching you the latter, i.e., the cut card method. And the reason we're doing that is because paraphrasing is often scrutinized by debaters. In its very nature, a debater that paraphrases takes an author's original words and puts it in his or her own words, And that is often prone to misrepresentation of what the author actually said because those debaters are self-interested.
So next up, I'll introduce some of the key components that you'll see in every card. The first is each card has a tag. And what a tag is a summary of what the card itself is trying to say or prove. So as you see in this example, the tag, which is in the blue box, is significantly shorter than the number of highlighted words because it's a summary of everything you're going to say. The tag is essentially an opportunity for debaters and judges to get another chance to flow your argument besides what you read in the blue highlighting here. Next up is a citation. At minimum, a citation is composed of an author's last name and the year an article or paper was written. So in this case, you'll see Weintraub 23, but a citation may also be more complicated. For example, Weintraub 23 of the New York Times, adding qualifications to qualify the author. Then you have an extended citation, which is all of the miscellaneous evidence about your author, the article, and the publication that you're not actually reading out. So in this case, you'll see the first name Karen, the date it was published specifically, which is July 22, the publication USA Today, the name of the article, as well as the link. So the reason why these components are important is because once your opponents or your judges ask for the evidence, you want to be able to provide it to them in this fashion so they can instantly scan all of the important information and click on the link to actually check that you're quoting from the evidence. Finally, you have your card text. So just to summarize, your core text is comprised of a large chunk of an article that you've directly copied and pasted in, and now you're underlining it, bolding it, and highlighting it to show different levels of importance. So all of these things are relatively subjective, but just as a briefing, the things you want to underline are perhaps both sentences that you think are general and somewhat important. The things you want to bold might be key words or key phrases you want to emphasize. And then finally, the things you want to highlight are the things that you think are so important or so grammatically necessary that you need to read them. So in this case, the blue highlighting is everything you would read after you say Weintraub 23, which is the citation.
So here's what you would actually read in round. Quote, the next pandemic will start in the US. Weintraub 23. The next pandemic could come from the US. Diseases originated in animals, HIV, Ebola, Zika, flu, and COVID. 10 billion animals are raised, poultry in higher numbers than anywhere else, the most likely vector. Regulation is inadequate and getting worse. The fur industry is even less regulated. 220 million wild animals are imported every year without checks.
Now that you've learned all of the different components of a card, we're going to piece that together and cut a card in lag time. Before we get into cutting, we're going to want two apps that are going to make our lives significantly easier. First, you're going to want to search up Site Creator on Google Chrome extensions. And what this is going to do for you is create a citation as well as the extended citation, so you don't have to waste any of your time on that. Second, you're going to want to download Verbatim, and this is the most important thing for debaters who are going to do a bunch of preparation. So Verbatim is essentially an extension of Microsoft Word that has a lot of different functions that debaters want to use. So it allows you to quickly underline, bold, as well as highlight, and it makes the process so much more efficient. So what I'm going to do here is I've picked a relatively qualified article from the Public School Review, and I'm going to now cut a card that says that wearing uniforms are good at school. So I'll just show you my process as I quickly skim through this card to show you why I've selected certain parts. Okay, so as you'll see in the first three paragraphs, there's a bunch of statistics, and you might think that's what we want, but once again, we want something that actually substantiates our argument. Here, all of these statistics aren't substantiating any argument, but they're just general context that we don't really want, so we'll leave that alone for now. Next, perfect. So as you can see here, the benefits of public school uniforms. So that's precisely what I wanted, which is a card that says that wearing uniforms in public school is good. So what I want to do is have this header as well as this paragraph, which I've read, which is saying that uniforms are good because they're not distracting and everyone is behaving in a way that's relatively uniform. And I'll paste that into Verbatim. Down here, you'll also see this is the site that my site creator created for me. So as we all know by now, at the very front, you're going to want the last name of the author as well as the year it was published. So it should be 1022, but site creators, since all of the sites are different, it doesn't get it right every time. So we're just gonna have to fix that once we copy and paste it. But it's gotten most of the information, which makes our lives significantly easier. I'll hand it over to Frank now to show you how to cut this card in verbatim using site creator.
So here's the verbatim template. As Sam earlier explained, it's an extension of Microsoft Word. And most foundationally, what it does is it makes cutting cards easier by allowing you to paste without any formatting, condense your text, highlight your text easier, etc. Now, the first thing we're going to do is copy and paste the citation as well as the card of the text into the verbatim doc. So remember, site creator doesn't always get the correct site for everything, so we're going to change up the mistakes. So here is the citation 1022 that you will be reading in round. The macro to make it the big size that you want it to be is F8, which is the cite macro. Now we're going to start underlining and bolding the card. The macro for underlining and bolding is F9 and F10. F10 is emphasis. So what you'll realize is when we're underlining, we're mainly just underlining both sentences, underlining the total context that we want judges and opponents to be reading. And we're currently clicking the macro on the keyboard, but if you want this to be even easier, you could use mouse macros as well. So we're slowly just going over all the logical reasons why the Chan evidence explains why uniforms are good. So some of those reasons are because it creates an environment where people aren't judged by how they look, as well as students not being distracted by what they need to wear every day to school. So now we're going to start emphasizing or bolding specific words. Remember, bold is the F10 macro. So now we're going to start emphasizing or bolding the card. Remember, emphasis is just used to highlight what you think is important. So say for learning environment, a not distracted is a great phrase. More time learning. I think you guys get the point now. There we go. So we're done underlining. The last thing we're going to do is highlight specifically what we're going to read in the card in a debate round. And remember, when you're highlighting, you want to be as concise as possible, but at the same time, creating full sentences and conveying as many ideas as possible. So now that we're done highlighting, the last course of action is to just shrink the rest of the normal text, that is text that hasn't been underlined, emphasized, or highlighted for purposes of being seen or read in a debate. So the macro to shrink text is just Control-8, and it shrinks everything that isn't underlined. Now that we're done formatting the text of the card, the last thing we need to do is just slap on a good tag. The macro for tag on verbatim is F7, and remember, the utility of a tag is just to give the judge a general summary of the card that they can flow down. So in this case, because the China evidence gives numerous benefits very quickly for the benefits of uniforms, we're just going to give it a rather generic tag. Quote, school uniforms create a better learning environment, and this tag rather succinctly summarizes what this evidence is all about.
That's going to be the end of it. Thank you so much for coming to the second session of the Debate Hub. I hope you took something away from this lesson, especially learning how to cut cards properly, and see you at the next session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.